All right, let's turn back to the book of Matthew. We have been on various parables tonight, and this past time, we had 2 weeks ago actually, that we had opportunity. We were talking about the lost sheep, which is probably one of the most well-known parables that we have. And of course, we know that the great shepherd left the 99 to go after the one because every one is important. And as a part of that, it behooves us to realize, say, well, you know, we can't reach them all. We're just glad to have what we do have. And the shepherd could have said that, but he said, no, the value of any one is important. The value of a soul, the value of a life, the value of reaching out and bringing another one in. And so the shepherd goes, and I can just see him bringing the sheep back. Now, whether he's actually having that maybe that shepherd's crook and he's doing a little bit of hastening, or whether he's got it around his neck and he's bringing that sheep back in. Or sometimes if it's a lamb and it continues to want to run off, they actually would break their legs so they couldn't run off again, and that shepherd will care for that lamb to make sure that it's nourished and understand that lamb is dependent upon the master, and they better listen or I'll break your legs again, I guess. Kind of a deterrent. But anyway, the care of the master to go out there. We see the love of God in the midst of this. It's an individual love. And that God could love me and you so much, but he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And so it's a love that is an individual love. The love of God is a patient love. The shepherd went out seeking. He went out looking. He didn't give up. Sometimes we'll give up on people. Well, this person I've talked to, and I've witnessed to them, and I've done this, and I guess, you know, I'm just going to give up. No, don't give up. Keep looking, seeking. That's what he did, and he sought until he found. And then the love of God is a rejoicing love, because the heavens rejoice when one sinner comes home, when one person repents and comes to know Christ. And that was the joy of bringing this one little sheep back. And maybe it was an adult sheep. I don't know. Perhaps it was a little lamb, whatever it may happen to have been. But you know the family of that sheep was happy too. I mean, think about it. You know, we're always glad to see family. Maybe there was a mother sheep that was, you know, heartsick as much as they can be as animals, missing that animal. You say, well, animals don't get like that. Listen, I can tell you, after spending a night on a screen porch in 90-some degrees in Haiti, when a baby calf is taken away from the mother, and the mother's going to cry out for that all night long. And we had that and smoke and snoring back there with the men. So you put all those together, it's anyway. What's that? That's true, yeah. The women were in a separate part. They were in an air-conditioned part, weren't they? What'd you say? They snore too. Careful, you're heading toward 49 years, okay. All right, so let's move right along here. Hey, we're going to move to yet another one. We know the ending of that, and of course the ending was that so is the rejoicing in heaven when one sinner repents and comes home. And isn't it exciting when someone comes to know Christ? When there's joy in heaven, especially when it's in your family, when it's in somebody that you know. And again, the greatest joy you'll ever have besides your own salvation is leading another soul to the point of where they accept Christ. We can't pray for them, but we can pray and lead them in a prayer, and they can receive Christ. Now I want you to turn over to the next one, which is a parable on the unforgiving servant. And as we'll deal with this one here, it's the unforgiving servant. So look over in Matthew 18, as we'll continue to stay in Matthew tonight on these various parables, and verse 23 through 35. Now, as Jesus spoke this particular parable, all right, it says in verse 23, And he's just been talking about forgiveness. Remember, how often do I forgive my brother? 7 times. No, 7 times 70, an unlimited amount. So Jesus then said in verse 23, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents. Now, to give you the enormity of what this is, someone has calculated that 1 talent represented about 6,000 days' work. So this would take over 190,000 years to repay a debt of 10,000 talents. It was an unpayable debt. And by the way, we had a debt that we owed that we could not pay. We could never do enough good works. We could never do enough good deeds. We could never sing, oh, how I love Jesus. We could never pray, never give enough, never do enough good deeds. We were in the same category. But, he says here, he was brought before him with 10,000 talents, but he was not able to pay his master. And commanded that he be sold and his wife and children and all that he had, that payment be made. Now that was pretty common then, that if a person could not pay their debts, then their family would be sold into slavery. And whoever they were sold to, they at least get some money out of that, kind of like maybe a bankruptcy would be, as you're able to get some of that back again. And so then at this point, verse 26, the servant fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. And then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, forgave him the debt. But then that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And this is the equivalent, basically about 3 months' pay. So it's a very small amount here, or 90 days' pay. And it says he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet, begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. But he would not, and he went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. And so when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved, and came and told their master all that had been done. And then his master, after he had called him, said, You wicked servant, I forgave you all the debt because you begged me. Should you not have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. And so my heavenly Father also will do to each of you from his heart who does not forgive his brother his trespasses. So, again, he's been talking about forgiveness. How often do I forgive? Well, 7 is basically what Peter said here in the verses, and you're familiar with that. Again, the rabbinical teaching here was that a person could be forgiven of a sin or an offense 3 times. But on the 4th time, you didn't have to forgive them. I think there are people today who operate like that. Some people don't forgive the 1st time. But, so Peter thought he was going to be generous. Let's go beyond the rabbi's teaching. What if I double that and add 1 for good measure? And say 7. Should I forgive someone 7 times? I'm being pretty generous here. And Jesus said, no, 7 times 70. What? Not 490 times on the 491st time you slap them down. No. They're not thrown into jail. It's the fact that it means the unlimited amount. 7 is God's perfect number. And of course 70, and so you have that type of common denominator there, and he's saying there's an unlimited. So that's what he has been talking about here, and that's the premise, that's the foundation of which now he launches into this parable, as Jesus taught by parables, and he's trying to impress upon them the need to forgive and to have real forgiveness in your heart, not just something that you say. I'm always a little leery of those people that say, well, I forgave them, but I sure hadn't forgot. Do you think that person's really forgiven? Not at all. Matter of fact, they think about it every day. Their time's coming. Oh boy, I hope I'm watching. There's people like that. Well, Jesus said you need to forgive, and that's the basis of what he's saying here. So when Jesus tells this parable here, the king's debt are 10,000 talents. Again, I told you how long that would be. And of course, this could have been a type of provincial governor that was underneath the king, who was supposed to report the taxes. Maybe he had been out like a Zacchaeus or someone and had taken in many taxes, and so he had a debt that he had not paid. He took that money, maybe he spent it somewhere else, he frivolously spent it away, and he didn't have it. And so that was why he had such a huge amount of money that he owed, that people had paid him or were supposed to pay him. And maybe he hadn't got all of that here. So the king says, well, I'll just have to sell your family, because that's what usually was done. And so he begs and he begs and pleads. And so the king had compassion, forgave him his debt. And he was so, so happy, and he was so thrilled, and he was so moved that he begins to think about a debt. You know, I've been forgiven this great debt, but you know that there's this old guy, he owes me something too. Maybe it was one of his under guys, some of these other IRS guys underneath him. And they were out there and they owed money. Maybe it was somebody who didn't pay taxes. I was going to pay you these taxes. I just don't have it right now. And please let me, I'll pay you all of it. I just don't have it right now. Maybe he had to wait for the crop to come in. And he could have paid it because it wasn't an enormous amount, but he would not have compassion. He would not forgive. And of course, had him thrown into prison until he could pay that particular amount. So no way. I'm not going to put up with this. And he'd completely forgotten that he had been forgiven. Now, before we get out there and say that was a scoundrel, a low down, good for nothing politician, whatever he was, let's understand that sometimes we could be as guilty. That God has forgiven us, and yet we can look down on someone else that maybe is still out there and have not been as forgiving. Their life has not been turned around, and we're operating as trophies of grace, and they're still out in the world. And so sometimes we expect them to act like we do, and of course they don't know the same master, and so there could be all the difference in the world. So they bring news back to the king. Well, this guy that you just forgave a debt that is so big that he could never pay it. He's actually gone out and just got somebody who actually owed him 90 days pay, and and he would not give him time. He would not have compassion on him, and that riled the king up, the king's anger. And of course, he delivers him to the torturers. We're not told any more about that. Perhaps he was beaten with rods. Perhaps, who knows, may have been scourged. But thrown into prison, as the case may happen to be. So, we think about that. Again, he had him arrested and given to the tormentors, and he had to go through that. Sometimes God will discipline us. Sometimes he will take us to the woodshed. Sometimes he will remind us when we have a tendency not to be as gracious, not to be as compassionate, not to think of them as a sinner is going to do what a sinner does. We expect more out of Christians. We expect Christian brothers and sisters to act on a different level than others act in this world. But God can discipline us, and sometimes it can be very severe, but he will not take our life in the process. You ever know anybody, it'll be somebody else, you're telling this story on somebody else. God, if you'll just answer this prayer, I'll do anything you want me to do. Now, I know none of you have ever prayed that prayer. God, if you'll just do this, I'll serve you, I'll do this. If you'll just heal my mama, if you'll just do this for my children, if you'll just, and God does it, and we forget all about it. Maybe for a little bit. People come back to the Lord or come back to church, and then all of a sudden they just walk away again. Same as this guy. He was so happy for a little bit that his debt had been forgiven, but basically didn't learn a thing because he went right back to being unforgiven. A kingdom quality is that we forgive people. And we have to forgive not only the lost that are out there and understand that they're just acting according to their lost nature, but we have to forgive even brothers and sisters because they're acting according to that sinful nature, that though they've been saved from the penalty of sin, sin still is in their beings, and until we're delivered from this body, we're like Paul, "Oh, wretched man that I am." And he said, I daily battle with this. And of course, that's why we have to die to self daily. So this is really not a parable about salvation, but it's a parable about forgiveness. And so we're supposed to have forgiveness for others just as God has forgiven us. All right? Let's move on to the next parable. Go to chapter 20 here in verses 1 through 16. Now, this is Jesus' parable on the laborers that he sends out. And notice what he has to say here. "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard." Let me give you the setting here. The setting is these were day laborers. There are places in Asheville that day laborers will gather. They don't have a job, but somebody needs some help for that day, and it pretty much may be grunt work. It could be loading, unloading. It could be digging a ditch. It could be doing something. They need to work. They need money for their families, and so they're willing to do it. They meet at a certain place, and people can come by. I need 2 of you. The others are left behind. Somebody else may come by later and I need 1 of you. I need 3 of you. And they do that. Now, what happens here is that was the day's pay so that they could eat, their wife could eat, their kids could eat, so they needed to be paid something. So they're willing to do whatever needs to be done because they had to have money coming in. When I graduated from Fruitland at 20 years of age, wasn't too many churches looking for 20-year-old pastors. And so I worked a secular job for about 14 months before I went to a church in Rockingham at 21. But I worked that secular job. 2 weeks into it, they went on strike. Well, we had moved back home from being there in Hendersonville, Fruitland, and we had a place we had rented. We had to make that payment and utilities and food, and I had to work somewhere. So the first week, I went to a sawmill. We got the lady who's on the prayer list, Michelle Frick. Her father owned a sawmill, and so I said, "Yeah, I'll do whatever. I just need to be paid." So I was in that sawmill. Do you know after you hear the ringing of a sawmill? I mean, this is a big industrial saw. You hear that ringing for about 6 weeks after you've been in there. And I did that 1 week, and I talked to one of the deacons at church the next Sunday, and I said, I need a job this week too. And he said, well, you can lay carpet with me. And I had done some of that before, so I laid carpet with him and got paid. And then they went back to work, thanks be unto God, at the place that had been on strike because part of them were union. And so we went back to work. These people needed a job and they needed money for their families, and so, and you've been there and you know what it is to be without a job and needing to be able to pay the bills. So here's the situation. So the master comes by and he says, it's harvest time. I've got these vineyards. I've got these grapes. And I need the grapes pulled before the rains come, which could be heavy, and there could be hail or something that comes along with them, and the entire crop is ruined. So I have a limited time. It could be wheat. It could be grain. Something has to be put up, but a crop has to come in. So he needed the laborers, and so he goes out and he gets them. Some he goes to early in the morning, it says there in verse number 1. He went early in the morning. Now, what is early in the morning? Well, this is 6 a.m. Okay, usually the Jewish calendar, when you start talking about the watches or the third hour of the day, you're talking 9 a.m., 6th hour of the day, you're talking 12 noon, 9th hour, you're talking 3 o'clock, just like with the crucifixion of Jesus. So this is early in the morning. This is right after 6 a.m., and he goes and he hires a worker, and he says, I'll give you a denarii, which was a denarius. A denarii was 1 day's pay for a common worker. By the way, Roman soldiers were paid the same thing, about a denarii, about a day's work, and so it was kind of across the board. I guess you would call it a minimum wage type of thing way back then. So and it says that he agreed to that. About the 9th hour, he went out, it says, or he agreed to for a denarius for a day's pay. Went to the vineyard. Verse 3, and he went out about the 3rd hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right, I'll pay you. Now with the first one, he had a contract, and he knew what he was going to be paid. And he knew that it was going to be this denarius, and so, but he says, I'll give you what is right, you're just going to have to trust me. And so they said, well, okay, we need a job, and we've got to get out there. He went again, verse 5, about the 6th and 9th hour, so noon, 3 p.m., he keeps going back and did likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went back. What time is that? 5 p.m., thank you. And so he goes back and he gets him, and we said, well, the day is about over. Well, he still needed some help. And so he gets him, and when the day is over with, it says there, and he said, well, actually, he asked this question, why have you been standing here idle all day? And he said, because no one hired us. And he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever's right you will receive. So he's told them the same type of thing, except for the first one, who he guaranteed he'll get a denarius. And so, this man says, well, look, if I get half a denarius, whatever, it'll be something for food. Even if I don't eat, my family can eat because they need to eat. And so all of these have been hired. So it says, so when the evening had come, this is after 6 o'clock, the owner of the vineyard came and said to his steward, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. So when he came, there was the guy that was hired in the 11th hour, 5 p.m., he received a denarius. Now the others there are just, man, this sounds good. If he's getting that, we must be bumped up in this situation. But it says, then, but when the first came, supposing that they would receive more, they likewise received each a denarius. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, these last men have only worked an hour, and you made them equal to us who've borne the burden and the heat of the day. And he answered one of them and said, friend, am I doing you no wrong? I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to the last man the same as you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish for my own thing, with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. For many are called, but few are chosen. So here's the example here that he's laying down there. Had the master done anything wrong? No. Some of you are still thinking, no, but he should have bumped in a little bonus there or something, these guys who had worked all day. But he had paid them exactly what he said he was going to pay them. So he said, I've done nothing wrong, but I chose through my compassion. Let's think about it. Our God is a God of compassion. Or let's say, first of all, he's a God of comfort. He's thinking about this man's here, and he's probably got a wife, and he's probably got kids, and they've got to eat just like these people that have been working all day long. This last guy has got that too, so he's a God of comfort. By the way, has God just ever given you what you deserve? Hasn't he always done more to each of us? He's done more. He is the God of excess. And so our God is a God of comfort, and that's what this man had done. And the master's grace, he did this. And so anyway, we don't understand why things are like they are. Some people live to a ripe old age, and some people go early in life. You can't get hung up in that. And people began to say, well, God's not fair, and why didn't he do this, and I'll never understand. You're not God. And it's not for you to say what's what and why God does something and what God may have spared this person from in life that they could have that could have taken place in their life. God may have spared them from something just the same way. So we find the story here that God's also a God of compassion. He had compassion on all of his workers, not just the first one, and all of them had the same need. Aren't you grateful he can save you just like he can save Billy Graham? That he saves each of us the same way, that the ground at the foot of the cross is level and we all can come in the same way to him. God's also a God of generosity. He gave those who didn't necessarily do the same work, but they got the same pay. By the way, we're reminded of the fact that one day when we get to heaven, there'll be those who maybe have been a Christian all of their life. And you say, it's not fair. They had a deathbed conversion and they get to go to heaven too. And well, they won't have necessarily the rewards that you will have, that you've had an opportunity to earn, or the blessings, or just even the knowledge of being with God's people. What a blessing it is to be with God's people, to be in a loving church, a praying church. And they don't know any of those kinds of things, perhaps, if that was the case for them. But God is very generous. There are those of us who were saved and early in life, and we ought to thank God, not because we had to be saved as a hellion out of all these sins that we were involved with, but because of what God kept us from. And we didn't have to go down that road, but God spared us. And that's a testimony in itself. So don't ever say, and I tell our young people, don't say that to you, I don't have a testimony. Yes, you do. You have testimony to say, I didn't have to go down that road, and God spared me from a lot. And that is a great testimony. So we have a great picture here of the grace of God. And it talks about two classes of people, those who are saved early in life, those who are saved maybe in midlife, those that are saved later in life. And yet heaven can still be the eternal home for each and every one of us. There are two warnings that are given here. One of these is to the disciples. Remember, he's talking to the disciples. So here's the warning to the disciples. The warning is this: you have received a great privilege because you've been privileged to come into the kingdom early in life. You've known what it is to be my followers. You've known what it is to have intimate fellowship. We who have been believers for a long time know what that's like, and because to whom much has been given, much will be required. So that's kind of a picture here as well that Jesus is trying to paint here, as well as the fact for some of you here tonight, I would say probably have been in church. Some of you have been in church 70 plus years. How many of y'all? 70 plus years. Praise God. Praise God. And some people, maybe that last person who will be saved one day and the rapture takes place. Think about the thief on the cross. Jesus said to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. May have come at the last moment, but praise God, he still will get in. Again, not an opportunity to serve and to do the things that we have opportunities to do. And we have to be careful, too, that though we have been in the church this long, that we don't look down on people who just now come into the church. We have to try to bring them along. And try to say, look, this is how we grow as believers. This is what we do. This is why we do what we do. And we try to bring them along and to help them. That's all a part of being discipled. But this is also a warning to the Jews. They were God's chosen people. And yet they were ignoring what Jesus, who he was and what he was doing. And they always looked down on the Gentiles. They called the Gentiles dogs. They didn't want the Gentiles to be saved. You remember Jonah, he didn't want to go preach to those heathen. I'm not going out there. They're not our type. They're not people that are fit for this. Just heathen. If anybody deserves the wrath of God, it's that. You know, we all deserve the wrath of God. We're going to talk about deserving. But the Jews, they were the chosen people. They should have known the way, and yet they didn't. He says the gospel will come to you. Paul said, to the Jew first, but also to the Greek. And aren't you thankful? Most of us here tonight are not of a Jewish heritage. We're of a Gentile heritage. And so we can appreciate that. And then he closes out this particular parable in verse 16 by saying, for the last will be first and the first will be last, for many are called, but few are chosen. Few are called, or many are called, but few are chosen. He's basically saying everyone here finished the same. They were in heaven. Now again, I understand the rewards of heaven, able to rule and reign with Christ based upon our faithfulness. Jesus gave so many parables about those who are well done, those who were given many more tasks to do because they've been faithful in these. You can't doubt the fact that that's all in there. But at least they're here, and we don't look down on people as second-rate citizens of the kingdom of heaven or second-rate Christians in that particular way. No matter how long each of these workers worked, each of them received a full day's pay. And so I think for everybody who goes to heaven, it's going to be heaven. For those of us who maybe have been Christians a little longer, maybe our enjoyment will be a little deeper, a little richer because we know more. And we have been, upon and done many other things, and who knows what any rewards may be. But anyway, people of this world will be, that are in the world today are the lost, and they're not a part of the kingdom. And so it just reveals the world that is out there and that we still need to reach them, and there's always somebody to reach, and they'll be reached even up until the 11th hour. So there's a lot of examples here and a lot of parallels here in this particular passage. All right, we'll stop there tonight. We're out of time, and we'll pick up the two sons next week. Let's stand, remember all the announcements in prayer, and let's have us a closing word of prayer. Ask God's blessing until we're able to meet again. Johnny Conrad's lead us in prayer, please.